Hello, I'm Amanda, one of Mrs. Hill's history helpers. Today we will be reading Chapter 63, Electing the 21st Century's First President. The year 2000 brought a new century and a new millennium, and a presidential election. The two candidates were George Walker Bush and Albert Gore. Both came from privileged backgrounds, but otherwise they weren't much alike. Al Gore grew up in Washington, D.C., where his father served as a Democratic senator from Tennessee. A serious kid, he went to St. Albans, a select prep school, and to Harvard, and then to Vanderbilt Law School. Gore worked himself up the political ladder from congressman to senator to vice president. He was an early voice on environmental issues like global warming. George W. Bush was descended from a patrician New England family with substantial wealth and a tradition of public service. Young George grew up in West Texas amid oil rigs, desert dust, and wildcat oilmen. He attended Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, where his father, the former president, had gone to school, Yale, where all the Bushes went, and Harvard Business School. Despite the impressive schools, he failed in several business ventures until he bought a baseball team and did well. And then he lost in his first foray into politics, running for Congress from Texas. But he had more political savvy than his critics understood. His relaxed, affable personality made him easy to underestimate. He ran for governor of Texas, won and won again, and at a time when the American people were looking for new faces, decided to run for president. He became the Republican candidate and Al Gore the Democratic. It was the longest and most expensive campaign in the history of the nation up to that time. How did it turn out? In a dead heat. It took 36 days to find out who had won. To understand what happened, you need to know about how the Electoral College works. The Electoral College is not part of a university. It has nothing to do with the school. It has no buildings. But when the members of the Electoral College vote, it is a weighty occasion. Those college members are called electors. Their vote decides who will be president. Every 4 years, each state chooses its electors. The number of electors in a state equals its number of representatives and senators in Congress. Electors never actually get together. What they do is send their votes for president and vice president to Washington. They vote for the rest of us. This is how they do it. In each state, the electors check the popular vote, that is, the number of votes by eligible voters for each candidate. Then, even if the vote is very close, usually all the electors' votes in that state go to the winning candidate. Although some states are reconsidering how they distribute their electoral votes, in general, it's a winner-takes-all system. So, imagine you are running for president. You come in a close second in all the big states and win most of the small states. Across the nation, you get the largest total popular vote, but you may still lose the election because your opponent gets more electoral votes. Why do we elect our chief executives that way? We do it because that's what the Constitution says to do. See Article 2, Section 1. In the year 2000, Al Gore won the popular vote nationwide by about 500,000 votes out of about 100 million cast. Gore's margin of victory was a tiny 0.5%, or half of 1% of the total, though if you count number of voters, not percentage, it was the largest margin since Ronald Reagan won in 1984. The electoral vote was split, with Florida's 25 electors holding the key to the election. Whoever got those 25 votes would become president. George Bush seemed the winner by a slight majority, but Florida's votes were being disputed. Substantial numbers of voters, especially African Americans, had been turned away from the polls for reasons that were later found to be invalid. Besides that, outdated voting machines had failed in many locales, and thousands of absentee ballots sent in by voters who were not in the state at the time of the election, had been treated in different ways in different parts of the state. Election night coverage on TV made the problem worse. The major networks predicted a winner before all the polls were closed, then changed their minds, then changed again. That may have influenced many voters. In brief, the situation in Florida was a mess. The first thing both sides did was to bring in armies of lawyers. The Democrats wanted to recount votes by hand in several disputed counties, especially where they thought they could gain votes. The Republicans didn't want any hand recounts. Both sides sent protesters to Florida. Things got nasty. Finally, the U.S. Supreme Court stepped into the fray. By a 5-4 vote, the court stopped all hand recounts, and that decided the election. George W. Bush became the 43rd president. But that didn't end the turmoil. For the first time in American history, a presidential election had been decided by the Supreme Court, and by one vote. That court, with its 9 unelected justices appointed for life, is the most powerful court in the world. Did it have a sound legal basis for this decision, or had the system gone awry? One of the 4 dissenting justices, John Paul Stevens, wrote, "Although we may never know with complete certainty the identity of the winner of this year's presidential election, the identity of the loser is perfectly clear. It is the nation's confidence in the judge as an impartial guardian of the rule of law." Others felt the Supreme Court had acted properly, and were relieved to see an end to 5 weeks of tumult. Almost everyone agreed that the machinery of voting needed reform, and the importance of every vote was made very clear. Our nation is an experiment. It always has been so. We see no shame in making mistakes because we have the means to correct our flaws.